Recently we shared here on this channel Beethoven's Septet Opus 20, exactly in the tempi as Beethoven himself chose for this major work. Some say it's dogmatic to stick to those tempo indications, but we prefer to call it uncompromised. Uncompromised to the choices of which we are certain the composer cared deeply about. And the wish for their works to be played in the correct tempo was the #1 top concern for many historical composers, and not only in the very far past. Ever heard about the heroic fight between Toscanini and Ravel after the premiere of his Bolero? Don't worry if you haven't, we'll bring that story soon on this channel. Another reason to stay tuned and hit the bell. This digital version of the septet was brought to you by Ken Nicol, a longtime friend of this channel, who, as a musician and software developer, used an amazing program called Note Performer to its limits in dynamic performance. And so, for the first time in God knows how many years, we were able to listen to a basic version of this famous work in the way as the composer doubtlessly had in mind around 1800. The tempi are the simple result of applying the exact metronome indications of Beethoven, but in the historical way, where the metronome ticks indicate the subdivision of the note value of the metronome mark. So instead of ticking like 1, 2, 3, we hear in fact 1 and 2 and 3 and so on. If you are new to this channel, you might be shocked by the tempi this version of the septet presented to you. And I wouldn't be surprised if your first reaction would be that these tempi are half of what you are used to hear. But nothing could be further from the truth. In the recent past, I made a few segments with the title Too Slow?, basically featuring modern performances of Chopin pieces that, in the light of the modern reading of the authentic metronome mark, simply were too slow. So, in simpler words, we might think Pollini plays Chopin's etudes exactly in Chopin's literal tempo indication, but in fact he does not. For which he's not to blame, by the way. If you haven't seen these videos, I linked the Pollini Chopin F minor etude segment over here. It's worth your time, since you will be surprised to see how drastically Pollini slows down that etude in the last page to bring the musical beauty to the surface. He not only starts slower compared to Chopin's tempo indication read in the modern way, but on that last page he slows down even till below whole beat. Because even Pollini, not particularly known for his slow performances, is 10% under the literal speed as given by Chopin. And even then, he feels the need technically or musically to slow down drastically at the end of his etude. I'll give you a fragment so you can see for yourself. So what these comparisons show is that the claims a half or single beat metronome practice would be the historical truth, at the bare minimum, is in many cases not followed by a practical realization, even not by the greatest virtuosos of today. And though the negative never proves the opposite fully right, it makes it certainly very probable. No surprise, a lot of you have asked me to continue that series, and so here we go. The Too Slow Today series will go along with the Czerny-Bach comparison videos. Those highlight a different aspect of the same phenomenon. Only there we see that in the case of Bach, so many musicians still play not far from what Czerny and Beethoven thought to be the correct Bach tempi, at least if we read his MMs according to the WBMP as well, the whole beat metronome practice. Link to that series in the info card right here. In this segment we will compare the tempi Beethoven gave for his septet to the version played in 2012 by Janine Jansen and friends, recorded and broadcasted by the Dutch National Television. I will repeat also here the disclaimer that I have the fullest respect for the musical choices made by the musicians featured in these segments, and that one can only admire the technical skills that enable them to bring this music in this way to their audience. Their performance only serves as a tool for comparison here to help us understand how these historical tempo indications relate to modern performances. So the septet has 8 movements, or at least 8 different tempo sections. Let me give you first a quick overview again of each section in the tempo according to the WBMP, combined with the same fragments taken from the Janine Jansen version. After this, we compare the results. And so in this chart you will see the tempo indications Beethoven had in mind for this work. If we now add the tempi chosen by Janine Jansen, we see something very interesting appear. First, of the 8 sections, 3 are exactly played according to the half or single beat interpretation of Beethoven's metronome mark, the tempo di minuetto, the scherzo and the short andante alla Marzia segment. The andante of the variations is even a little faster, but with 5% still to be considered as a perfect half beat, so modern reading of the metronome. 4 out of 8 sections, that's 50% in total, and this leads to an important conclusion. If 50% of all the metronome marks are followed exactly as given by the master, we can be pretty sure that in the preparation for this recording, the musicians took Beethoven's tempo indications serious. It would be super coincidental if they had hit 4 out of 8 parts exactly right without aligning their tempo choice to that of the Viennese master. But if Beethoven's tempi are true for 50% of his septet, why not for the other 50%? Of the remaining 4 parts, we see an increase of 28% in the opening adagio, 28% increase compared to half-beat reading even. So that is more than doubling the tempo compared to the WBMP reading of Beethoven's metronome mark. The reason why this ensemble played so much faster than meant here is worth a segment on its own. We could touch upon the lost world of the old adagio feeling, but let's not digress and keep focused on our tempo comparison. For 3 parts of the septet we notice a considerably slower tempo than Beethoven had in mind, again if half or single beat reading indeed were the norm back in 1800, which we all know that was not the case. So now stick with me just a second. This is a situation you will find often in orchestral music. Some parts are played according to the modern reading of the metronome marks. If ever the super fast tempi needed to be justified, our beloved metronome marks are good enough to be dragged on stage. But if one ever would ask why the other movements, oftentimes as here is the case as well, the technical more demanding parts, are not played according to the same metronome indications, you'll get the answer that the metronome numbers only give a target, and furthermore, who cares really about the authentic speed indications? Don't we all know that Beethoven's metronome was broken? In other words, that the man who composed the 9th Symphony didn't notice his entire life that his metronome did not give the second when put on 60? But you can't have it both ways. Either we pay no attention at all to the MMs, which would be a terrible mistake if we do care about music of the past, or we do care, but then not for 50% but for a full 100%. That attitude has nothing to do with being dogmatic, it simply is a sign of how much we care for the authentic ideas of the composers we claim to love so much. I will now give you the half or single beat correction of the 3 segments that in this sublime version were too slow. Ken Nickel was so kind of setting the tempo scale in Note Performer to that modern reading for the sake of comparison. And to make the comparison the more useful to you, you will hear the 3 versions. The Janine Jansen tempo, then the 100% half or single beat version, and to close a comparison again the WBMP tempo. Here we go. So the takeaway for you from these comparisons between the authentic tempi and modern performances is that our current mainstream performance practice, neither the one that uses modern instruments, neither the one that uses periodical instruments, will showcase you in an uncompromised way the musicological claims made by people as Martin Noortuin or Klaus Mieling. Both of them did wonderful jobs in bringing together data, and in Noortuin's case for sure an awareness of the importance of the authentic metronome marks, but they should and most probably will realize the same thing as you and I. Their persistent claims for that half or single beat metronome practice to be historically correct is nothing more than a loud call in the desert. Since although it pushes musicians far beyond their limits of technical power, there is no musical culture that backs them up in the claims they keep making. As is shown in this top performance of Beethoven's Septet. Beethoven's metronome marks are great, only if we can manage to perform them in half or single beat. But when that's not possible, we simply forget the arguments that were good enough to decide the tempo in the other movements. Again, I do not say this with any form of disrespect to this group of wonderful players. I very well know how they were taught to think, since for a long time I was part of the same system. It are our musicologists to blame, since they should lead us to the historical paradises of Beethoven, Chopin and many others, but in reality, some without knowing, some in full consciousness, they do the opposite. They guide us to the warp speed version of Beethoven, and I don't know about you, but it's not where I want to be.
Warp drive, Mr. Scott.
So that was it for today. Like this video and share it with your friends and subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Don't forget to hit the bell as well so YouTube can notify you for future updates and become part of this musical movement by becoming an Authentic Sound Insider at patreon.com. You'll find a strong community there, scans of my personal scores, my personal practicing sessions, previews of the YouTube videos and inside updates as well. Link below and in the description box. Thanks for watching and see you soon again.